Hi, I'm George Friedman with Agenda, and with me today is Reva Bhalla. We're now at the first anniversary of the unrest that arose in Egypt that marked the beginning of the Arab Spring. And at the time, we were pretty skeptical. We were skeptical not that there was unrest, but we doubted very much that that unrest was going to yield liberal democracies flourishing in the Arab world. We were criticized for that at the time as being unduly cynical. My view is that you cannot be excessively cynical about events in the Arab world when it comes to liberal democracy. And I think we did pretty well in predicting that many regimes would not fall, some personalities would, and whatever came out of it was unlikely to be a liberal democratic rising. So the real question now is what happened? Why did so many hopes get dashed? Why, in fact, were we right, if you want? Reva, what do you think?
Well, as you say, George, not all demonstrations lead to uprisings. Not all uprisings lead to revolutions in the true sense, and not all revolutions result in liberal democracies. And maybe if we take a look at Egypt as a good case study to begin with, we saw the military, first and foremost, as the key institutional strength in that country, and that did not waver. In fact, we saw the military exploit the demonstrations for their own cause, which was to unseat Mubarak to resolve their own succession crisis that they were experiencing. So by identifying the military, not focusing so much on the very photogenic protesters on the streets, but focusing on the guys with the guns, we're using the same analysis as well in a way to look at the situation in Syria, identifying what is the center of gravity in each of these conflicts, seeing if those are actually wavering to a significant degree, what other variables are in play. And when we look at Egypt, we see, a year later, the military is still the central authority. There are new complications with the rise of Islamists and so on, but that reality hasn't changed.
To me, the Egyptian case is a classic case of changing the leader and thinking, therefore, you've changed the regime. The regime remained in place. It remained the military. But you did get rid of Mubarak, and that seemed to signal something. What's of interest to me is that the only real regime change you had was in Libya. And in Libya, Gadhafi was winning. He was about to take Benghazi. And it was out of fear that he would initiate a slaughter in Benghazi that NATO intervened. And even that intervention took many months, over 7 months, to bring him down. So the thing that comes through to me is the durability of these regimes. One of the things that was the theme a year ago was the fragility of these regimes. What I see really is an incredible durability, that in spite of unrest, in spite of outside opposition, someone like Assad in Syria continues to hang on, and that virtually all the places where you did have risings, you just didn't lose the regimes. How do we explain the ability of the regime in the Arab world to remain intact in spite of outside observers' conviction that they're about to fall?
Well, except when you have the game changer of foreign military intervention, right? Because in Libya...
That made all the difference. I mean, that was not a revolution. That was a foreign invasion tying up with some opposition groups who would not have won on their own.
Right. So moving to the more salient case right now in Syria, we see again, a Alawite-led army largely holding, still under tremendous pressure. There are different sectarian variables in play here, but the Free Syrian Army rebels, while receiving covert support, they do not have the means to overwhelm the Syrian army yet. And there's an assumption here that the regime is just eventually going to fall on its own. But unless we see that degree of military intervention, and I don't think the United States is moving toward that end just yet, or will, for that matter, given the other complications, like you said, we are seeing regimes holding out for some time.
And I think the really important thing to understand is the model that many people had was of tyrannical regimes without any support. In fact, in Syria, the Alawite regime, or Gadhafi for that matter, had substantial support. A lot of people who, for various reasons, benefited from the regime, believed in the regime, and were willing to fight to support it. The model of the lone tyrant standing on top of a regime that everybody hates and the army crumbling in the face of the people just is too simplistic a model. These regimes are more complicated, they have more support, and in the end they have far more endurance. The question really that becomes very important to me then is, what is the second phase of this? We've gone through the first phase, and many of the hopes are dashed. But still, you did have a substantial number of people protesting, rising, and so on. Where do you think this all goes in the end?
Well, let's look at two key themes that arose from this unrest, because those are going to play out, especially this year. One, we've seen how the situation in Syria especially has brought to light those underlying geopolitical tensions between Turkey and Iran, two rising powers in the region. And that's where we're going to see a lot of competition continue to play out in the Syria crisis, also in Iraq especially. But let's not forget what's happening in the eastern littoral of the Arabian Peninsula, where we're seeing continuing unrest in Bahrain and eastern province of Saudi Arabia. A lot more, glossy flyers coming out from protesters showing how to construct a Molotov cocktail, and very detailed things now coming out. And the glaring fact of the matter is that this did not happen, not nearly on this scale, a year ago or before.
But remember that in the case of Bahrain, you also have Iranian influence, major Iranian national security interests. The U.S. Fifth Fleet is located in Bahrain. And so it's not so much a revolution, but it's a revolution plus an international alignment. I think one of the things to look at very carefully is that to the extent that this is going to turn into a broader mass movement, it's not going to turn into a liberal democratic mass movement. The expectation was that what was going to come out of this was Euro-American kind of constitutional democracies. The Islamists are much more powerful in the countries, much more powerful in the streets. And you may get a democratic society, but it's not going to be a constitutional society like we expect in the West. And I think that really is one of the lessons, that you may get a revolution in some of these countries, but it may be very different from the kind of revolution that Western admirers of the Arab Spring were hoping for.
Definitely, and this is, as George has said before, the Arab Spring was an excellent primer on wishful thinking and reality. And so thank you for joining us for this week's agenda. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you.